Hey.
Hi.
Hello. Welcome back, Misfits. Welcome back to a new episode. Today, we're going to continue the conversation about the Tabernacle. We're going to specifically talk about a room inside the Tabernacle called the Holy of Holies, and also talk about the veil, which is what separates the room we talked about last week, which was the holy place from the Holy of Holies. And if that was confusing, just keep listening and we'll explain it. All right. So as glorious and elaborate as the Tabernacle was, its most important room was known as the Holy of Holies. And fun fact, it almost contained no furniture.
Very minimalist.
Yes,
so minimalist
it was a
dream.
minimalist vibe, exactly. Yeah. When I was researching this, it just makes me think of us making space for God in our own lives and removing the clutter. So just being careful of what we listen to, what we read, what we watch, all these things, and just making room for God in our lives and for God to just removing the clutter so we can hear God more clearly.
Right. What's in the room of our heart?
What's in the... That is so cheesy.
The more you know.
Clean out your room. Marie Kondo your room, bro. All right, so...
I can't fold like that. Don't bring
Does
that
it
in
bring
here.
you joy? All right, bring it back. So this room only contained the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant is an ornate, gold-plated wooden chest. The lid was known as the Mercy Seat, which is strange.
It's where the presence sat.
Yeah.
So it needed a seat.
It's the mercy seat, yeah. So the ark the only thing that was inside, it housed the 2 tablets of the law given to Moses by God. And Exodus also mentions it had Aaron's rod and a pot of manna, which is what the Israelites were given as food by God when in the desert. But it's believed that these items were in the ark only when traveling and not something that was kept when it was set up. Remember that this was a portable setup, right? Because the tabernacle itself was a tent and it was portable, and the ark was portable as well.
Right.
So the ark was seen only by the high priest of the Israelites on Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement. The Levites, who we had talked about before, who were the people that were responsible for maintaining the tabernacle, carried the ark with them during the Hebrews' wanderings in the wilderness. So while the Israelites were in the wilderness with Moses and, the whole 40-year spiel, the whole 40-year sentence that they were doing, the Levites were basically carrying it around with them,
yes,
right? Yeah.
Yes.
After the Israelites conquered Canaan, which is the promised land, the ark was left at Shiloh, which is the ancient city of Palestine, now known as Palestine.
Right.
But on occasion, when the Israelites went into battle, they took it with them, which is interesting because it just made me think of them taking God or God's presence with them into battle, right?
Right.
Yeah, which is just really cool because I just imagine them fighting or doing something and then looking back and looking at the tabernacle for I don't know, hope
can you
or
help us?
Yeah,
Can you step in? Can you
exactly. So it's
bring
a
miracle?
very physical representation of God, help us.
Yep.
And then finally, it was taken to Jerusalem by King David, and then eventually placed in the temple by King Solomon, who Solomon is King David's son, and also teaching moment, also known as the wisest man to ever live.
Right. He was a smart one.
He was a smart one.
Yeah. Okay, so next we're talking about the veil. The veil, also known as the curtain, it's what separated the holy place from the Holy of Holies inside of the tabernacle. It was one of the most ornate objects in the tabernacle. It was embroidered, it was made of fine linens and yarn, and it's what protected the throne or, God's presence. Which is crazy because I know we mentioned a lot of different things that were in the tabernacle made of gold and very ornate objects, but just know how nice and how elaborate this veil was.
There's things covered in gold, but they're oh yeah, but this veil though.
This veil is
top
nice.
notch. Yeah, this is fancy.
And this is one of the reasons. It was 60 feet tall.
Which is crazy.
4 inches thick. Say what? What? It was held up by 4 pillars of acacia wood, and it was hung up by gold hooks and clasps. So I can't imagine this was a light thing either.
Right. No.
If it's 4 inches thick,
no.
And it's embroidered and made of all this stuff, that is one heavy.
For some reason, it just makes me think of a really thick rug.
Yeah, they hung a rug.
This is thick.
Yep. So that being said, it was parted once a year on the Day of Atonement by a high priest. And just to note, in the Old Testament, people could not be in the presence of God. Of course, we understand, the sin is what separated us from God. And being in his presence, So because the presence of God was like being manifested in the Holy of Holies, people couldn't like be in his presence, which is why the Bible talks a lot about how God manifests himself in like angels, and then we hear about the burning bush with Moses. Like they couldn't like physically be in the presence of God. So this was like the way that they could be like redeemed.
Pre-Jesus.
Yeah. So there were very specific people who were appointed or allowed to go before his presence, and like we said, these were the priest and the Levite. And we bring this now, I think one of the most important things for us to do this episode is just to talk about how that now translates to when Jesus came, and then he became that sacrifice, and he became the blood offering. So in the tabernacle and the Holy of Holies, there was a shedding of blood, and that was the atonement of sin, which was a living sacrifice. So now we understand Jesus, being the sinless Son of God, could serve as a final and satisfying sacrifice to pay for all of our sins. So Jesus Christ was the completion of what was established before by God. So everything that happened before that was established, like through the tabernacle and through this whole process, is now being done through Christ. So when Jesus died on the cross, we have read that the veil was torn in the temple, and it was torn from top to bottom. And that's just to show like no one but God could have done something like this. Like we mentioned, this thing was 60 feet tall and very thick. And so it just was meant to show that this couldn't have been done by any person.
Right, a human couldn't have done it.
Right.
Yes.
And they needed a sign, and that was that sign to understand that it was God. And the tear meant that by the death of Jesus, God had destroyed that barrier. We no longer had a barrier between God and humanity, and we understand that only God could give that and have the authority to do that. The tearing of the veil also meant that now, as a follower of Christ, we can just go to God directly. Like there's no longer some kind of intervention or something that we need to do, another person that we need to go through.
Right, which at that time it just looked like me talking to the priest, and then the priest taking my sacrifice or my petition to God. So now I don't have to do that. I can just talk to God directly wherever I am. Yeah.
And not just one time a year like they used to. This is like now that you accept Jesus, it's anytime.
He's available 24/7.
Exactly. So we see that Jesus Christ, being the high priest, now he has interceded for us, right? He has been the sacrifice. And through that sacrifice on the cross, there's no more barriers. Now we can be in his presence. We can dwell with him. We are his people. He can be with us. And I think that's so significant what a difference, right? Like we see in the tabernacle and all these rules and all these like one day, one person.
Specific people that have specific responsibilities. Yes.
And now here we are knowing that Jesus has just laid his life, and there is no more veil, and now we can just be in his presence.
Yeah, because even like how we talked about it last week, where it was like the bread of the presence, remember? And then the priest had to like bring out the new bread and then eat the old bread and then do the sacrifice and then eat part of the sacrifice, and then there was a lamp and he had to maintain the lamp and make sure that
family had to bring one and
make sure the tent didn't burn down and the incense and like it was complicated.
Yeah, it was a lot of maintenance, and it took a lot of people
definitely
to maintain it all year round for this one day. And this one sacrifice that like held everybody else's sins, including that priest. And there was so many rules about that priest too, which, we're not going to get into because it's a lot. But, we kind of rely on this one person who is a man himself,
right?
Carrying this and has kind of like one shot, to be able to do this. And so now we see just like the whole miracle and blessing that it is, that we don't have to do any of that. And Jesus already did, and he's like, it's done. You can come to me anytime you need.
Yeah.
Like no waiting.
Yeah. And then I think one of the most significant things is that the tabernacle, as we talked about last week, is that means dwelling place, right?
Yes.
It's the dwelling place. And now Jesus, or God, right, the presence of God no longer dwells in a place. He just dwells in us.
In us, yeah.
And we can just wrap it up with that, because that's just great.
Yeah.
It's like good times. So we hope you enjoyed this episode. We hope you learned something about the tabernacle. Next week, we're going to continue the conversation about the tabernacle and talk specifically about the Ark of the Covenant. We're just going to get a little teachy and dive into that chest and the experience certain people had with it. So we hope you enjoyed this episode. We hope you learned something. And as always, this is Fran.
This is Yadi.
We are the Midtown Misfits, and we will see you next week. Peace.
Bye.